He ruled Chicago with blood and silence. Every crime lord, every corrupt politician, every man who thought himself untouchable, they all bent the knee to Damian Vaughn. But on a cold Tuesday night in February, inside his own kitchen, the most feared man in the city stood completely still. Not because of a rival's move, not because of a federal warrant, because of a bruise. Small, purple-yellow at the edges, sitting high on the cheekbone of a woman who had spent 6 months learning how to be invisible inside his home. Damian Vaughn had survived bullets, betrayals, and a lifetime of darkness. But something about that bruise, and the way she flinched when he stepped closer, cracked something open inside him that no enemy ever could. If a story about love born in the wrong world hits different for you, hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And follow along, because you do not want to miss what comes next. God. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary and something faintly sweet. Brown butter, maybe, or the last of the caramelized shallots she'd reduced down to almost nothing in the copper pan sitting on the back burner. It was 9:47 in the evening. The rest of the estate had gone quiet an hour ago. Security had done their sweep. Marcus, his head of detail, had locked the east wing and posted the overnight rotation at the gates. The house was sealed the way it always was. Tight, professional, invisible to the outside world. Damian Vaughn came into the kitchen because he couldn't sleep. That happened sometimes, not often, but enough that the kitchen staff had learned to leave a covered plate in the refrigerator on nights when his light stayed on past 9. Cold food. Something simple. He never asked for it. They just did it because working for Damian Vaughn meant paying attention to details that were never spoken aloud. He pushed through the swinging door, expecting an empty room. She was still there. Evelyn Hart stood at the far counter with her back to him, shoulders curved forward, both hands braced against the edge of the stainless steel like she needed it to hold herself upright. She wasn't cooking. She wasn't cleaning. She was just standing there in the low light, breathing slowly, and she didn't hear him come in. Damian stopped. He was not a man who hesitated. 38 years of survival in a world that killed hesitant men had burned that instinct out of him before he turned 25. But something about the way she was standing, the particular stillness of a person who has learned to be very quiet inside their own pain, made him pause in the doorway. He cleared his throat. She spun around fast. Too fast. The kind of fast that came from spending time around people who moved without warning. Mr. Vaughn. Her voice came out flat, controlled. I'm sorry. I was just finishing the prep for tomorrow morning. I'll be out of your way. She reached up to push her hair back from her face, and that's when he saw it. The bruise. It sat on her left cheekbone, high and dark. The center of it a deep purple that had already begun bleeding outward into a sickly yellow-green at the edges. Fresh enough that the skin around it was still slightly swollen. She'd done something to try to cover it, foundation maybe, applied carefully, but the kitchen lighting was brutal and honest, and it cut right through the concealer like it wasn't there. Damian looked at it for 3 full seconds. She looked at the floor. What happened to your face, he said. Not a question, just words laid down flat. I walked into a cabinet door. She said it immediately, the way people said things they'd rehearsed. I do it all the time. I'm clumsy. He didn't say anything. The silence stretched out between them, and she filled it the way people always did when they were uncomfortable. She started moving, gathering her things, folding a dish towel with unnecessary precision, buying herself small actions that didn't require eye contact. It's late, she said. I really should... Evelyn. She stopped. He had never used her first name before. In 6 months of her working inside his home, it had always been Hart, or nothing at all. She turned back to look at him, and something in her expression shifted. A small fracture, like a wall that had held for a long time and was now taking on just a little too much weight. Who hit you? He said. No one hit me. That's not what I asked. She set the dish towel down on the counter. Her jaw tightened. She was maybe 30, he figured. He'd never looked closely enough to be certain. With dark hair pulled back and the kind of careful, contained posture that came from years of making herself small in rooms. She was not small, but she had practiced smallness until it fit her like a second skin. I appreciate the concern, she said, and her voice had gone carefully neutral. the same tone she used when she was listing off the week's menu. Professional. Distant. Gone. But it's nothing. I'll have everything ready for your 8 o'clock breakfast. She picked up her bag from the hook near the side door. Damien moved to the left, not blocking her path exactly, but changing the geometry of the room in a way that made leaving feel different. You've been here 6 months, he said. She waited. You come in before anyone else. You leave after. You don't take breaks. You don't complain. You've never once asked me for anything. He paused. And tonight you're standing in my kitchen alone at 10 o'clock, holding yourself together like something's about to break. Her throat moved. That bruise, he said, is not from a cabinet. The silence that followed was different from the one before it. It had weight. She stood very still with her bag on her shoulder and her eyes somewhere near the middle distance, and he watched her decide. He could actually watch the decision happen, the small war between the version of herself that had survived by staying closed and the version that was just tired. My brother, she said finally, quietly, like the words cost something. Damien didn't move. He has debts. She let out a slow breath through her nose. He always has debts. And when he can't pay them, he comes to me, and when I tell him I don't have the money... She stopped, touched 2 fingers to her cheekbone without thinking, then pulled her hand away. It's not the first time. How much does he owe? She blinked. That's not... How much? She looked at him for a moment like she was trying to read the angle. Everyone who came into Damien Vaughn's orbit eventually learned to look for the angle because there was always one. That was the first lesson this city taught you. 80,000, she said, maybe more by now. The interest compounds. Who does he owe it to? Mr. Vaughn, answer the question. The Bitmats. She pressed her lips together. A man named Garrett Solis. He runs lending operations out of a pawn shop on West Division. Travis borrowed from him 3 years ago, and it's been a hole ever since. She shook her head. This isn't your problem. Travis is my problem. He's always been my problem. Damien said nothing. He walked to the refrigerator, pulled out the plate his staff had left covered in the bottom shelf, set it on the counter, and peeled back the foil. Cold roasted chicken. Roasted root vegetables. Bread. He pulled a stool out and sat down. Sit down, he said. She stared at him. I'm not going to bite you. Sit down. She sat down on the stool at the opposite end of the counter, slowly, like she was waiting for the catch. He ate without talking for a minute. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind moving against the estate's east windows. You're a good cook, he said. Something almost like a laugh moved across her face. Thank you. I don't say that lightly. I've had a lot of chefs. I know. I've heard. He glanced up. What have you heard? That you go through them quickly. She folded her hands on the counter. I was told 3 weeks was the average. When they hired me, I figured I had a month, tops. You figured wrong. Apparently. He set his fork down. Why do you still need this job? You're good enough to work anywhere in this city. She was quiet for a moment. Because anywhere else in this city requires references from places I can't go back to. And because this job pays better than anywhere else. And because, she paused, because Travis doesn't know exactly where I am. Or he didn't, until recently. Damien looked at her. He found out, she said. It wasn't a question she was answering, just a fact she was laying down. 2 weeks ago, he showed up at the service entrance and security turned him away. Then last Thursday he called and said he needed $10,000 by the end of the month, or Solis's people were going to break his hands. She looked at the counter, and when I told him I didn't have $10,000 sitting around, he drove to the apartment and... She touched her cheek again, caught herself again, stopped. He drove to your apartment, Damien said. Yes. He knows where you live. He's my brother. He's always known where I live. That ends tonight. She looked up sharply. Excuse me? You're not going back to that apartment. That's my apartment. I pay rent on that apartment. You don't get to... I'm not telling you what to do with your life, he said, and his voice was very calm. The kind of calm that had nothing soft inside it. I'm telling you that a man who hits you knows where you sleep. That's a problem with a straightforward solution. Which is what exactly? I move into your estate? I become some kind of... She stopped herself. There are 4 guest properties connected to this estate. 2 of them are empty. One is 15 minutes from here, gated, with its own security code, and nobody in this city who matters knows it exists. He picked up his fork again. You can stay there until the situation with your brother is resolved. The situation with my brother is not something that gets resolved, she said. Her voice had an edge now, something worn through to the raw material underneath. Travis has been a problem since we were kids. He's been in debt since he was 19. He has spent the last decade treating me like a solution to his problems, and I have spent the last decade letting him because he's all I have left, and I don't— She stopped again, pressed both hands flat against the counter. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because I asked, he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. Damian Vaughn was not what people expected when they imagined the kind of man who ran the underside of a city like Chicago. He was 41 years old, lean rather than broad, with dark eyes that gave nothing away and hands that looked like a carpenter's. Rough-palmed, capable, scarred in small places from old things he never explained. He didn't wear his power loudly. He wore it the way very cold weather wore itself. You felt it before you understood what you were feeling. Stay at the property, he said. Just for now. You don't have to owe me anything for it. She was quiet. I'll have Marcus arrange it tonight. You can leave from here. She looked down at her hands. Something moved through her expression that he couldn't fully name. Gratitude mixed with something more complicated. The particular discomfort of someone who had learned not to accept things from people because accepting things always came with terms you didn't see until it was too late. I don't know if that's a good idea, she said softly. Probably isn't, he agreed. Do it anyway. The gated property on North Burling Street was modest by Damian Vaughn's standards, which meant it was nicer than anywhere Evelyn Hart had lived in the last 10 years. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that made her hands itch with the want to cook in it, hardwood floors, and windows that looked out over a narrow courtyard where bare-limbed trees stood in rows like sentinels. Marcus had handed her the code at the door, given her a number to call if anything felt wrong, and left without a word. That was the way with Damian's people. Efficient, quiet, no performance. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on a lamp. Her phone had 7 missed calls from Travis. 2 voicemails she didn't listen to. A text that said, I know you're working for someone important. Help me, and I help you. Don't make this hard. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she'd slept somewhere that felt even close to safe. She couldn't come up with a year. Evelyn Hart had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport with a mother who worked double shifts and a brother who figured out early that the world owed him something and spent the rest of his life trying to collect. Travis was 6 years older than her. When their mother got sick, a slow collapse over 3 years, expensive and grinding, it was Evelyn who had dropped out of culinary school after 2 semesters to work. Travis had sent money twice. The second time he'd borrowed it back within the month. She had learned to cook in that apartment, not because anyone taught her, but because food was the one thing she could control, the one system that responded honestly to attention and care. You put in the work, you got the result. You paid attention to heat and time and texture, and the kitchen told you the truth. Nothing else in her life had worked that way. She'd spent years building herself up through restaurant work, prep cook, line cook, sous chef, a disastrous 6 months as head chef at a Wicker Park bistro that went under owing her $4,000 in unpaid wages. She'd rebuilt again. She was always rebuilding. The position at Vaughn's estate had come through a staffing agency that specialized in high-end private households and was known for asking very few questions about their clients. The pay was better than anything she'd seen. The hours were brutal. The environment was— she'd understood from the beginning what kind of household it was. You didn't take a job cooking for Damian Vaughn without knowing the name, without understanding, at least approximately, what the name meant. She had decided it didn't matter. She needed the money. Travis's latest cycle of debt had started bleeding over into her life in ways that were getting harder to contain. And the idea of earning enough to put distance between herself and that cycle, real distance, had outweighed the risk. Or so she'd told herself. She closed her eyes in the dark of the unfamiliar room and told herself this was temporary. She told herself she was not becoming dependent. She told herself that what Damian Vaughn had done tonight was an employer looking after an employee and nothing more. She almost believed it. The next 3 days passed in a kind of suspended quiet. She went to work each morning the same as always, arriving before dawn, working through her prep lists, cooking what needed to be cooked. Damien ate his meals without comment, which was his version of approval. He passed through the kitchen twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and both times he looked at her face, not at the bruise specifically, just at her. The way someone checked a thing they were keeping track of. On the fourth day, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway at 11 in the morning with his hands folded and told her, in the same tone he might use to relay a logistics update, that Garrett Solis's lending operation had been informed that Travis Hart's outstanding balance had been cleared. Evelyn set down her knife. "Cleared," she said, "in full, plus accrued interest. The account is closed." Marcus paused. "Mr. Solis also understands that Travis Hart is not to be extended further credit, of any kind." She looked at Marcus for a long moment. He was a large, quiet man with a gray-streaked beard and the particular stillness of someone who had seen a great deal and metabolized all of it. "Mr. Vaughn did this," she said. "Yes," without telling me. "Yes." She picked up her knife again, set it back down. "I need to speak with him. He's in a meeting until 2. After 2 then." She found him in his study at 2:15. He was behind his desk with a file open in front of him and a half-finished glass of water at his elbow, and he looked up when she came in without knocking. She hadn't knocked. She'd thought about it and decided that knocking was for people who were asking permission, and she was not asking permission. "You paid Travis's debt," she said. "I did. $83,000. 86, with interest." She stood in the middle of the room with her arms folded and looked at him. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No. I didn't want you to do that." "I know." "Then why?" "Because the man who was holding that debt over your brother's head is the same man who is going to keep sending people to your door," Damien said. He closed the file. "Not because Travis asked them to, because that's how Solis operates. He uses the debt to get to the people around the debtor. He's been doing it for 12 years and nobody in this city has bothered to stop him because he's useful in ways that don't need explaining." He leaned back in his chair. "He won't be useful much longer." Something cold moved through her at that. She recognized it for what it was. The particular chill of understanding, finally and fully, exactly what kind of world you had walked into. "I want to pay you back," she said. "No." "Damien?" The name came out before she could stop it. She watched something shift very slightly in his face. "Mr. Vaughn, I'm serious. I need to pay you back." "Why?" "Because I don't want to owe you." He looked at her steadily. "Owing me is not as dangerous as you think it is." That's exactly what someone dangerous would say. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one, brief and real. "Maybe, but it's still true." He stood up. "Don't worry about the money. Worry about your brother. Clearing the debt didn't fix him. It just bought him time." She knew that. She'd known that since before she was old enough to name it. "What did you say to Solis?" she asked. "Enough." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer you get." He came around the desk slowly, not toward her, just moving, and stopped near the window with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking out at the grounds. "Travis came to the estate gate this morning." She stiffened. "What?" 7:15. He said he wanted to talk to you. Security called me. He turned to look at her. "I had him removed." "You had him?" She stopped. Drew a breath. "He's my brother." "He hit you." "I know he hit me. I was there." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated it. Hated the way anger and something older and more painful kept getting tangled up together every time Travis came into it. "You can't just—" "He hit you," Damien said again, and there was something very final about the way he said it, like it was a line drawn in a specific place. "While he's in debt to men like Solis, while he's making decisions with violence, he does not come onto this property. That's not negotiable. He's my family. I know what he is." He looked at her directly. "I also know what he's done, and those two things don't cancel each other out just because they come from the same person." The room was quiet for a moment. She hated that he was right. That was the specific misery of it. Not that he was saying something she disagreed with, but that he was saying something she had been trying not to think clearly for years, and he was saying it plainly, without apology, and now she had to stand in the room with it. "He has nowhere to go," she said quietly. "He has choices. Travis doesn't make choices. He makes excuses for why the choices aren't available to him. Then those are his consequences to carry." He turned back to the window. "You've been carrying them for long enough, Mom." 3 weeks later, she was standing next to Damian Vaughn at a charity gala in the Gold Coast, wearing a dress she hadn't bought herself, in a room full of people who controlled things she would never fully understand, and she was trying to remember how she had gotten here. It had happened slowly, and then all at once, the way these things did. First, it had been small. He'd asked her to come with him to a restaurant opening, said he needed someone to handle the dietary logistics for a private dinner, and she was the best person for it. She'd gone. She'd handled it. He'd introduced her to 3 people as my chef, Evelyn Hart, and there was something about the way he said it, not possessively, but with a kind of weight, like her name was worth saying fully, that she hadn't known what to do with. Then there had been a gallery event. Then a dinner at a private club where 4 men in very expensive suits had looked at her with the particular assessing look of people calculating exactly what her presence meant and what it told them about Damian's current position. She understood by the 3rd event that she was not just attending these things, she was being shown. The gala was in a ballroom on the 23rd floor of a hotel she'd catered for once, years ago, hauling sheet trays up a service elevator at 5 in the morning. The irony of it sat somewhere between funny and nauseating. She stood near the bar with a glass of sparkling water she wasn't drinking and watched Damian work the room. She understood now that it was work, that the easy way he moved through a crowd and shook hands and said the right 6 words to each person was a skill as practiced and deliberate as anything she did in a kitchen. A woman appeared at her elbow, late 50s, elegant in a sharp-edged way. Red dress, white hair cut close. "You're Damian's chef," the woman said. "I work for Mr. Vaughn, yes." "That's not what I said." The woman smiled pleasantly. "You're the one he's been bringing to things. People are talking about it." Evelyn looked at her. "People talk about everything. In this crowd, they talk about specific things specifically. And the specific thing they're saying about you is that Damian Vaughn doesn't bring someone somewhere unless it means something." She sipped her drink. "I'm not telling you this to alarm you. I'm telling you because you look like someone who prefers information to ignorance." "Who are you?" "Helen Carew. I've known Damian since he was 19 years old and terrible at hiding what he was thinking." She tilted her head. "He's gotten much better at it since then, but not completely." Evelyn said nothing. Helen Carew looked at her with the kind of frank assessment that was almost refreshing in a room full of performance. "You should know that being visible in his world is not a neutral thing. Every person in this room has spent 20 years learning where the lines are. You don't know where the lines are yet." "I'm aware of that." "Are you?" It wasn't skeptical. It was genuinely curious. Because the people who get hurt in Damian's orbit are usually the ones who thought they understood the lines and found out they were wrong. She set her glass down on the bar. "He's a careful man, but careful men make enemies too." Across the room, Damian looked up and found Evelyn's eyes with no particular searching. Just looked, the way someone checked on something they were always half-tracking. She held his gaze for a moment and then looked away. "I appreciate the information," she said to Helen Carew. "I'm sure you do." The woman moved off into the crowd. Damian arrived at her side 90 seconds later, which told her he had been watching the exchange. "What did she say to you?" he asked. "That you have enemies." "That's true." "And that being visible in your world isn't neutral." "Also true." He reached past her to set his own glass down on the bar. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." He looked at her sideways. He had a way of doing that, the sideways look, that she had learned over weeks to recognize as the version of himself he used when he was asking a real question behind a simple one. "I'm fine," she said again. I need to know what this is." What is?" "This." She gestured slightly between them, small enough that no one in the room could read it. "You bringing me here, to these things." He was quiet for a moment. "It's protection," he said finally. "In this world, visibility is a form of protection. If people see you with me, they know who you are. They know what touching you costs. She absorbed that. It was practical. It made sense. It was also not the complete answer, and she was fairly certain they both knew that. "And is that all it is?" she asked. He looked at her directly, and for a moment the practiced restraint in his face was not completely sealed. Something moved in it, something real and unguarded and more complicated than protection. "No," he said, and then he looked back out at the room, and the seal closed again, and that was that. Listen, it was Travis who detonated it. She should have seen it coming. She had seen versions of it coming her entire adult life. The particular trajectory of a man with no internal brakes and no real accounting for consequence. She had just wanted, for once, to be wrong about him. She wasn't wrong about him. It was a Tuesday morning in March, gray and cold, the kind of Chicago cold that had given up being dramatic and settled into a grim routine. She had just finished the morning service. Damien had 3 guests staying, business associates from somewhere she wasn't told, and was breaking down her station when she heard the shouting from outside. She knew Travis's voice before she reached the window. He was at the front gate, loud and getting louder, his coat open despite the cold, both hands on the iron bars, talking to security in the way of a man who has convinced himself that volume is the same as leverage. She could hear maybe 1 word in 3 through the glass. "My sister. She doesn't know what she's... 10 minutes. I just need..." One of the security team, a man named Cole, who was about twice Travis's size and had about half his interest in drama, was saying something low and direct that Evelyn couldn't hear. Travis wasn't listening anyway. She watched from the window, with her chef's coat still on, and her hands still damp from the dishwater, and felt the familiar sink of it, the specific gravity of Travis, which was its own force of nature, and always had been. The part of her that had spent 30 years learning his patterns said, "Walk away, let security handle it. Don't give him the audience." The part of her that remembered being 15 years old in their mother's kitchen, when he'd come home with a split lip and a story about the wrong side of an argument, said, "He's still your blood. You can't just..." She pushed through the side door into the cold. "Travis?" She kept her voice flat. "Stop." He looked up and his face shifted immediately. The particular performance of someone who had learned that the best leverage with her was always something that looked like need. "Evie, thank God. I've been calling you for 3 weeks." "I know. I haven't answered. Because of this." He gestured at the estate with a kind of contemptuous sweep. "Because you're in here playing house with..." "Don't!" Her voice went sharp. "Don't!" He pulled the bars and lowered his voice, suddenly conspiratorial. "You don't understand what you're involved in. I've been asking around. Do you know who this man is? Do you know what he..." "Yes," she said. "I know exactly who he is." "Then why are you..." "Because I work for him, Travis. That's all. I cook his meals and I get paid and I go home. That's the whole thing." "Then why are you living on his property?" She felt the cold more sharply suddenly. "How do you know where I'm living?" He looked at her, and something in his face was wrong. Not guilty exactly, but adjacent to it, that particular careful blankness he wore when he'd done something he knew she'd call him on. "Travis, how do you know where I'm living?" "I have people." "Who?" The word came out hard. "Who are your people now? Because 3 months ago you were $86,000 in debt to a loan shark on Division Street, and the only person you called was me." His jaw tightened. "I've made some new connections." "What connections?" "People who understand how things work in this city. People who..." He stopped, looked at her. "Just come out, Evie. Just come talk to me for 5 minutes without the fence between us." "No." "I'm your brother. I know what you are." The words landed, and she watched them land, and she watched him absorb them, and she watched the thing that moved through his face when he realized she'd borrowed them from somewhere, or from someone. Cole had moved closer without her noticing, positioned himself slightly between her and the gate. "Leave," she said to Travis. "Don't come back here." "Evie, don't come back." She turned and walked back through the side door and let it close behind her and stood just inside the kitchen with her back against the cold metal door and her eyes closed and her hands trembling slightly, which she hated, which she could never seem to stop no matter how many times she had this version of this conversation with him. She heard the shouting resume briefly outside, muffled and then go quiet. When she opened her eyes, Damien was standing in the kitchen doorway. She didn't know how long he had been there. She suspected it had been long enough. "He knows where I'm living," she said. Her voice was steady again. She'd gotten very good at making it steady. Something moved in Damien's expression, something dark and deliberate. "I know," he said quietly. Something in the way he said it, the particular weight of it, the specific quality of his stillness, made her look at him more carefully. "You already knew," she said. He looked at her and didn't deny it. "How long have you known?" "Since last week." The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window she could see Cole watching the empty gate. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. Damien moved into the kitchen slowly, the way he moved when he was thinking about more than the room he was in, and stopped at the counter and looked at her with the kind of directness she had come to understand was his version of respect. He didn't soften things for you, didn't pad them with reassurance. He said the thing and let you carry it. "Your brother has been in contact with a man named Vincent Moretti," he said. The name meant nothing to her. It clearly meant something to him. "Who is Vincent Moretti?" she asked. Damien was quiet for a moment. "Someone who has been looking for a way to reach me for a long time," he said. "Someone who just found one." The silence that followed filled the whole kitchen, and somewhere in it, Evelyn Hart understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water through the chest, that the world she had stepped carefully into was about to step very deliberately back. The name Vincent Moretti sat in the kitchen air between them like something that had weight and temperature, and Evelyn found herself doing what she always did when something was too large to process immediately. She moved. She went back to her station, picked up the knife she'd set down, and stood there holding it without cutting anything. "Explain it to me," she said. Damien pulled out a stool on the opposite side of the counter and sat. He didn't rush it. She had noticed early on that he never rushed explanations. Not because he was withholding, but because he seemed to understand that the shape of the information mattered as much as the information itself. "Vincent Moretti has been operating on Chicago's South Side for 15 years, he said. "Freight, protection, a loan network that makes Solis look like a corner store. We've had an arrangement, separate territories, separate operations, mutual non-interference." He paused. "That arrangement ended 8 months ago when 2 of my distribution points were hit by people who weren't careful enough to leave no trail." "You think it was him?" "I know it was him. I just couldn't prove it in a way that settled things cleanly." He watched her hands on the knife. Not with concern, just with attention. "So we've been in a holding pattern, both of us knowing, neither of us moving first." "And Travis?" "Your brother has been approached by someone in Moretti's organization. We don't know when it started, probably sometime in the last month." He folded his hands on the counter. "What we know is that 2 days ago he sat down with one of Moretti's mid-level people in a bar on Halstead and talked for 45 minutes. Evelyn set the knife down carefully. "Talked about what?" "You." The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the estate a door closed. "Travis doesn't know anything about me that would be useful to anyone," she said, and even as she said it, she heard the part that wasn't fully true. Travis knew where she lived. Travis knew her routine. Travis knew, now that Damien Vaughn had paid his debt and installed her in a property he owned, and had been bringing her to events in rooms where powerful people watched who stood next to whom. Travis knew enough. "He's not doing it to hurt you," Damien said. "I know why he's doing it." Her voice came out flat. "He needs money." Someone offered him money, and it didn't matter what they wanted in return, because Travis has never once in his life looked past the next 30 days. She picked up a cloth and wiped the counter that didn't need wiping. What do they want from him? Access. Information. Patterns. Damien paused. "You." She stopped wiping. "Not physically," he said quickly, and the quickness of it told her it had crossed his mind that she'd hear it the worst way. "They want leverage. If Moretti can demonstrate that he has a line into this house, into my movements, my schedule, my operations, it changes the calculation. It tells every other player in this city that I can be reached." He looked at her steadily. "You being here, being visible, that was supposed to make you safer. It also made you valuable to the wrong people." She thought about Helen Carew at the gala. Being visible in his world is not a neutral thing. "What happens now?" she said. "Now I deal with it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have tonight." She looked at him across the counter and felt the specific frustration of a person who was not accustomed to not knowing the full shape of a situation. In a kitchen, you knew what you had. You knew your ingredients, your equipment, your timeline. You could look at the whole board and make decisions. This was nothing like that. This was a board she couldn't see, with pieces she didn't understand being moved by people whose motivations ran deeper than she had access to. "I need you to tell me the truth about something," she said. He waited. "Did you know this was a possibility when you started bringing me to those events? When you put me in that property and put your name on me in front of those people, did you know there was a chance it would paint a target?" The silence that followed was its own answer. "Yes or no?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I calculated it as low probability. I was wrong." She nodded slowly. Something tightened in her chest, not quite anger. Something more complicated than that. Something that had anger in it, but also something that felt uncomfortably like understanding, which she didn't want to feel right now. "Okay," she said. "That's it?" "Ma, no. But I'm too tired to have the real conversation tonight." She picked up her knife and started breaking down the last of her mise en place, and the sounds of the kitchen, the scrape of blade against board, the soft clatter of metal, filled the space between them. "Go do what you need to do. I'll be here in the morning." He stood up from the stool slowly, stood there for a moment like he was going to say something else. He didn't. He left. She stood at the counter in the empty kitchen for a long time after, and she cut vegetables that didn't need cutting, and she tried very hard not to think about the fact that the most dangerous man she had ever met was also the most honest one. Marcus came to her 2 mornings later with a phone. Not her phone, a different one, slim and gray, already unlocked. "Use this for anything work-related going forward," he said. "Your personal number should stay clean." "Clean from what?" "From being monitored." She took the phone. "My number is being monitored." "Possibly. We're being careful." "Who is we?" Marcus looked at her with the patient expression of a man who had answered many questions he wasn't authorized to answer. "Mr. Vaughn's team." "And what exactly is Mr. Vaughn's team doing about the fact that my brother is selling information about me to Vincent Moretti?" "Managing it." "Marcus." "Ms. Hart." He said it with a kind of firm gentleness. "I understand this is difficult. I can tell you that Travis is being watched. I can tell you that Moretti's people have not made any direct approach to this property or to your secondary residence. I can tell you that Mr. Vaughn is not taking this lightly." He paused. "Beyond that, I'm not the right person to brief you." She stared at him. "Is there anything you need this morning?" he asked. "For the kitchen?" She looked down at the gray phone in her hand. "Fennel," she said. "I need fennel and the market order was short. I'll have it sent." He left. She put the gray phone in her coat pocket and stood in the kitchen and understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that she was inside something that had its own momentum now, and the question was not whether she could stop it, but whether she could keep her footing while it moved. She called Travis from the gray phone that afternoon. She almost didn't. She stood on the back steps of the estate in the cold, with the phone in her hand for 4 minutes, running arguments both directions, and then she called because not calling had never once in her life made Travis Hart less of a problem. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been waiting. "Evie." "Don't." She kept her voice low and even. "Don't do the voice. I know what you've been doing." Silence. Then, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Travis?" "I'm serious. You sat down with a man named Rennie Cross in a bar on Halstead 3 days ago and talked about me for 45 minutes. She heard his breathing change on the other end. "How much did they offer you?" "It wasn't like that." "How much?" 20,000. He said it quietly, and the quiet of it was somehow worse than if he'd been defiant. "They said all they wanted was information, general information, who you talked to, where you went, what his schedule looked like from the inside. They said nobody would get hurt." "And you believe that?" "Evie, I needed the money." "You always need the money." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she hated it. Hated that it still cracked even now, even after everything, even after the bruise on her cheek and the 7 missed calls and 30 years of this. "That's not new, Travis. What's new is that you went to people who want to use me to get to someone who will hurt you for doing it." "Then leave." His voice came out suddenly desperate and real. "Just leave, Evie. Just walk away from that house and that man and come back to your actual life. You don't belong in there. My actual life was already compromised the minute you told them where I lived. I can fix that. You cannot fix anything. The words came out quiet and final and absolutely true. You never could. You have never once fixed anything in your life, Travis. You make holes and I fill them, and that's the whole relationship, and I'm done filling holes. She stopped. Drew one breath. Don't contact me again. Don't contact me through Moretti's people. Don't contact me at all. Evie. She ended the call, stood on the back steps in the gray March cold, and stared at the bare garden, and felt the particular hollow of a decision that was the right one and also cost something real. She heard the door open behind her. Damien came and stood beside her, not too close, looking out at the same garden. He didn't ask about the call. He had probably heard enough of it. I told him not to contact me, she said. Good. It won't work. He'll do it again. He'll find a way. Let me worry about your brother. She turned and looked at him. That's exactly the kind of sentence that sounds like an offer and is actually a warning. He looked back at her, and for once the careful distance in his face wasn't fully operational. Yeah, he said. It's both. They stood there in the cold for another minute side by side, not touching, looking at the dead garden, and it was the closest thing to ordinary she had felt in weeks. The meeting happened on a Thursday. She wasn't supposed to know about it. She knew about it because she was in the kitchen at 7 in the morning when Marcus came through to tell the overnight staff to stay out of the East Conference room until further notice. And because the two men who arrived at 8 a.m. through the private entrance wore the kind of expensive restraint that meant old money or old crime. And in Chicago, those two things had enough overlap that the distinction barely mattered. She kept her head down and cooked. She was plating the breakfast service when she heard the raised voices. Not clearly. The East Conference room was 2 hallways and a heavy door away, but raised voices in Damien's house were rare enough that the frequency alone carried through walls. Cole appeared in the kitchen at 9:15 and asked her very politely to take her break now and use the back courtyard. She took her coffee and her coat and went to the courtyard and sat on the iron bench near the dead rose bushes and waited. At 9:40, Damien came through the courtyard door. His jacket was still on, which meant the meeting was done. His jaw was set in a way she'd learned to read as controlled fury. The contained kind, the kind that had decided what to do and was waiting for the right moment to do it. He sat down on the bench across from her. Moretti made a move, he said. She put her coffee cup down on the arm of the bench. What kind of move? He approached 2 of my distribution managers, separately. Same pitch. Come over, bring what you know. The transition would be financially rewarding. His voice was completely flat. Both of them came to me directly. You trust them. I trust that they're smart enough to know what happens to people who don't come to me directly. She absorbed that. What are you going to do? What I should have done 8 months ago. He looked at her. It's going to get louder before it gets quieter. Define louder. More movement. More people around you. More restrictions on where you go and when. He paused. I know that's not what you want. What I want has not been the primary variable in this situation for some time, she said. Something moved in his expression. Evelyn, I'm not blaming you. She said it before he could take it somewhere it didn't need to go. I made choices too. I stayed. I went to those events. I took the phone and the property and the protection, and I told myself it was practical, and I didn't look at what it was actually doing to my position. She picked up her coffee again. I am aware of my part in this. He was quiet for a moment. Your part in this is that you did your job, and your brother made you a target. My part in this, she said carefully, is that I let myself get comfortable, and comfortable was a luxury I hadn't earned yet. He looked at her for a long time. She looked back. The dead rose bushes rattled in the cold wind, and somewhere on the street beyond the wall, a truck went by. I need to tell you something, he said. The quality of the silence before the next words was different from every silence that had come before it. She felt it the way you felt weather changing, before the temperature dropped, before the sky moved, just a pressure shift in the air. Moretti isn't just after leverage, Damien said. He's been building a case, not a legal case, a narrative. For the other players in this city, a story about me losing my edge, getting distracted, making decisions based on personal attachment instead of... He stopped, started again. He's going to use you specifically as evidence that I'm compromised. She was very still. Which means he has to do something with you that makes the point visibly, Damien said. Not hurt you, something more surgical, something that humiliates me through you. She thought about that. The particular mechanics of it, how it would work, what it would look like, how you made a point about someone by moving the person standing next to them. She understood it better than he probably expected her to, because she had spent her whole life in rooms where the power dynamics were never about her directly, only about what she represented to whoever actually mattered. He's going to come after me publicly, she said. Yes. Soon. I think so. And Travis is going to help him. Damien didn't answer, which was its own answer. She stood up from the bench, finished her coffee, set the cup down on the iron armrest. Okay, she said. You keep saying okay, because I keep needing a minute before I'm actually okay. She looked at him. What do you need me to do? He stood up too, and they were closer than they usually stood, the narrow courtyard not giving either of them much room. She could see the small scar along his jaw that she'd noticed on day one and filed away without examining, could see the lines around his eyes that were not from laughing. I need you to trust me, he said, even when I can't explain everything. That's a significant ask. I know. She looked at him for a long moment. You said the same thing to those two distribution managers, she said. Come to me directly. Trust the structure. And they did, and it worked out. Yes. The difference, she said, is that they were afraid of you and I'm not. Something in his face shifted. I know that too. So you actually have to earn it. I know. She nodded once, picked up her cup, turned toward the door. Evelyn, she stopped. What I said to your brother in the beginning about what touching you would cost. He paused. That wasn't just a strategic statement. She didn't turn around. She stood with her hand on the door and felt the weight of that land somewhere in the middle of her chest and stayed very still with it for a moment. Then she opened the door and went back to her kitchen. The call came on a Friday morning at 6:48 while she was reducing stock. Not from Travis. Not from a number she recognized. A man's voice, polite, professional, almost pleasant. Ms. Hart. My name isn't important. What is important is that you understand the following. The man you're working for has been using your presence in his household to conceal financial transactions that are going to attract federal attention very shortly. We have documentation, we have witnesses, and we have a very clear line connecting your name to several properties used in the distribution of controlled substances. She turned the burner down slowly. Her hand was completely steady. When federal agents arrive, and they will arrive, Ms. Hart, probably within the next 72 hours, the evidence is going to look very bad for you specifically. Not for Damien Vaughn. For you. She said nothing. There's a way to make this disappear entirely, the voice said. You come to a meeting. You listen to what we have to say. You make a decision that's in your own best interest. That's all. She looked at the stock reducing in the pot, the way the surface moved, the small turbulence just before it broke to a full simmer. How do I reach you? She said. The man gave her a number. She wrote it on the back of a receipt in her coat pocket. She did not call the number. She turned the burner back up, finished her stock, plated the breakfast, called Marcus, and told him she needed to speak with Damien immediately. Marcus said he was in meetings until noon. She said, tell him someone from Moretti's organization just called my personal phone. Damien was in the kitchen in 4 minutes. She handed him the receipt with the number on it and watched his face while he read it. And what she saw there was not the controlled fury from the courtyard. It was something colder and more deliberate than fury. It was the face of a man who had been waiting for a specific thing to happen and had just watched it happen exactly as he'd expected. They called your personal number, he said. Yes. Which means Travis gave it to them. Yes. He folded the receipt and put it in his jacket pocket and stood in her kitchen with his eyes somewhere beyond the far wall and his jaw set tight, and the silence around him had a specific texture, the texture of a decision being made, or several decisions, assembling themselves in a sequence she couldn't see. I need to make some calls, he said. I know. He turned to leave. Damien. He stopped. They said they have my name on properties, financial records. She kept her voice level. If that evidence is fabricated, it can be disproved, but if it lands before it's disproved, it won't land. You don't know that. He turned back to look at her fully. I know Moretti. I know his methods. I know what he's built and how he's built it. And I know exactly what it looks like from the outside and exactly how it falls apart from the inside. His voice was very quiet. Trust me. She looked at him. She wanted to say, that's the second time you've asked me that this week. She wanted to say the last person I trusted with something I couldn't afford to lose was my brother. She wanted to say a lot of things that were true and probably fair and would accomplish nothing in this kitchen at 6:53 in the morning. Go make your calls, she said. He left. She turned back to her station and stood there with her hands on the counter and breathed slowly and tried to name what she was feeling. Fear, yes. Anger, yes. But under both of those, something else. Something that had been building quietly for months in the spaces between all the careful, practical, reasonable things she had told herself about this situation. Something she had been refusing to name because naming it would mean acknowledging how far past safe she already was. She was still standing there when Marcus appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, his face carrying its usual professional neutrality in a way that today had slightly too much effort in it. Ms. Hart, he said, I need you to come with me. What's happened? Federal agents are at the front gate. He paused. They have a warrant. The stock boiled over on the stove behind her. She didn't move to stop it. For what? She said, though some part of her already knew the answer before Marcus finished the sentence. For you, he said. Mas. They came in through the front gate with 2 vehicles and a piece of paper, and the particular confidence of people who had decided in advance how the next hour was going to go. 4 agents, 2 in suits, 2 in jackets with letters across the back. The one in front was a woman named Special Agent Carla Reyes. She introduced herself at the door, with her credentials held out in a way that was professionally courteous and completely inflexible at the same time. Evelyn stood in the entry hall in her chef's coat with her hands loose at her sides and read the warrant that Reyes handed her and felt the words move through her eyes without fully landing. Evelyn Marie Hart, conspiracy to distribute, money laundering, facilitation of controlled substance trafficking. Her name, her full name, middle name included, the name on her birth certificate and her social security card, and the culinary school enrollment form she'd filled out 14 years ago before she'd had to leave. Her name on a federal warrant inside a house that belonged to a man whose name was conspicuously absent from the same document. Ms. Hart, Reyes said, you'll need to come with us. Damien appeared at the top of the stairs. He had his phone in his hand and his jacket on, and his eyes moved from the agents to Evelyn to the warrant she was holding with the focused efficiency of someone taking an inventory. She's not going anywhere without counsel present, he said. He was already dialing. Mr. Vaughn. Reyes looked up at him with the particular neutrality of someone who had prepared for exactly this response. This warrant pertains to Ms. Hart specifically. You're welcome to have your attorneys meet us at the federal building. My attorneys will be here in 12 minutes. You can wait. We're not required to wait. No. He came down the stairs slowly. But you will. Something shifted in the room. A pressure change. The kind that happened when 2 very different kinds of authority found themselves in the same square footage. Reyes held his gaze for a moment and then looked back at Evelyn. Ms. Hart, do you understand what's outlined in that warrant? Evelyn looked up from the paper. Yes, she said. Her voice was completely steady. She was somewhere outside herself watching it happen, which was the only way she knew how to survive things in real time. Step slightly to the left of your own body and observe. Then you understand we need you to come with us. She understands, Damien said, and she's not moving until my people arrive. The 12 minutes were the longest of her life. She stood in the entry hall and did not sit down when one of the junior agents suggested she might want to, because sitting down felt like conceding something she wasn't ready to concede. Damien stood 6 feet away from her and made calls in a low voice and did not look at her the way she expected him to look at her. Not with guilt, not with calculation, not with the specific expression of a man figuring out how to manage a situation. He looked at her the way you looked at someone you were not going to leave in a room alone. The attorneys arrived in 11 minutes, 2 of them, a man named Weller and a woman named Cross, both in coats they hadn't fully buttoned yet, both carrying the alert energy of people who had been pulled from somewhere else and run. Weller took the warrant from her hands and read it in 45 seconds and looked at Reyes. On what basis are the properties listed in Section 3 connected to my client? That's a question for the proceeding, Reyes said. The financial records referenced in Section 4, also for the proceeding. We'll need copies of all SHPA. They'll be available at the federal building. Reyes looked past Weller at Evelyn. Ms. Hart, we need to go now. Evelyn looked at Damien. He held her gaze. Something in it, she couldn't name it precisely, some combination of certainty and restraint, was the most honest thing she had seen from him since the night in the kitchen when she'd told him about Travis. Go, he said quietly. Weller goes with you. I'll have this done before tonight. She nodded once, put her hands in the pockets of her chef's coat and walked out the front door of his estate between two federal agents and told herself the trembling in her legs was cold and not fear, and mostly believed it. The interrogation room at the federal building was exactly what interrogation rooms always were. In the way that utilitarian spaces built for a specific purpose always converged on the same answer. Gray walls, gray table, fluorescent light that made everyone look like they hadn't slept. They left her alone in it for 22 minutes before anyone came in, which she understood was deliberate. You put a person in a bare room and let the silence work on them. She'd spent enough time in small spaces with her own thoughts to be largely immune to it, but she noted the technique the way she noted everything. Reyes came in with a second agent, male, younger, introduced himself as Barlow, and a manila folder she set on the table between them without opening it immediately. Ms. Hart, thank you for coming in. I wasn't given a significant choice. Reyes almost smiled. No, I suppose not. She sat down across from Evelyn. Barlow stayed standing near the door. Weller is outside. He'll be informed of everything we discuss. I want you to know that you are not under arrest at this time. At this time? That's correct. Evelyn folded her hands on the table. Then tell me what this is. Reyes opened the folder. The first thing she laid on the table was a property record. A commercial property on the west side. A building Evelyn had never seen, never heard of, never been anywhere near. Her name was on the ownership documents. The signature was close to hers, but not quite. She could see it even upside down, the slight wrongness of it, the way a copy was always slightly less than the original. The second document was a bank record, an account she had never opened, containing transactions she had never made, attached to a routing number she didn't recognize. The third was a photograph. Grainy, long lens, taken at a distance. A woman leaving a building on the west side at what the timestamp said was 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks ago. The woman was wearing a coat similar to one she owned. Her face was turned away from the camera. The build was close enough. Close enough. We have 2 witness statements placing you at that location on the night in question, Reyes said. We have financial records showing payments into an account registered in your name over a period of 8 months. We have property documents with your signature. She paused. We also have a recorded statement from a witness who says you were directly involved in coordinating distribution out of that property. Evelyn looked at the documents, looked at all of them laid in a row under the fluorescent light, and felt something shift in her chest. Not panic, not yet, but the cold precursor to it, the feeling of a floor you thought was solid, developing a crack under your foot. Who is the witness? She said. Reyes looked at her for a moment. You understand I'm not required to— I know you're not required to. She looked up. I'm asking. Reyes and Barlow exchanged a glance. Something in it was slightly off. A fraction of a second too long. A micro-expression Evelyn couldn't fully read but noted. Reyes reached into the folder and placed one more document on the table. It was a witness statement form. She could see the signature at the bottom before Reyes slid it across. Could see it from 18 inches away. Could read it as clearly as she'd ever read anything in her life. Travis Allen Hart. The fluorescent light buzzed. Her brother's handwriting. His signature, full and clear and completely voluntary looking. The pen pressed firmly into the paper the way Travis always wrote when he was trying to look more certain than he felt. She sat with it. She didn't speak. She did not make a sound. She sat completely still in the gray chair in the gray room under the gray light and looked at her brother's signature on a document designed to put her in a federal prison, and she felt something move through her that was beyond anger, something older and more structural, like the load-bearing wall of a building finally deciding to go. Miss Hart, Reyes said, give me a minute. Reyes sat back. Evelyn looked at the ceiling. Breathed in through her nose, slowly, the way she did when a kitchen was going sideways and she needed to find the stillness at the center of the chaos. In through the nose, hold for 3 counts, out through the mouth. She had learned that at 15, managing 3 burners and a broken oven and no one else in the apartment. She used it now. When she looked back at Reyes, her face was composed. "Every document on this table is fabricated," she said. "The property signature is forged. The account is not mine. The photograph is not me. And the witness statement was produced by a man who was offered something in exchange for it, which you may or may not know. Ms. Hart, I have worked as a private chef for the last 6 months. Before that, I was head of kitchen at 3 different establishments in this city, all of which can be verified. I have never coordinated anything related to controlled substances. I have never been to that property." She paused. "What I can tell you is that the person who constructed this, the fabricated documents, the forged signatures, the false witness, has resources and motivation and a specific purpose that has nothing to do with me and everything to do with using me to reach someone else." Reyes studied her. "You're talking about Damian Vaughn. I'm talking about whoever wants to make it look like Damian Vaughn has compromised people in his orbit, which is not the same thing." She looked at the documents. "This isn't about prosecuting me. If it was about prosecuting me, you'd have brought actual evidence. This is about a story, a narrative. Someone wants a headline that connects my name to his operation, and the details don't have to hold up. They just have to exist long enough to do damage." Barlow shifted near the door. Reyes's expression had gone very neutral, which Evelyn had learned in the last 40 minutes meant she was processing something she hadn't fully anticipated. "Those are significant claims," Reyes said. "They are, and I'll make them on record, in front of counsel, with a detailed account of the events leading to this arrest, including the phone call I received this morning from a man connected to Vincent Moretti's organization." She held Reyes's gaze. "Would you like to tell me who contacted your office about this case? Or would you prefer I let Weller ask that question on the record?" The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. It had a specific quality, the quality of someone recalibrating. Reyes picked up the documents and put them back in the folder. "I'd like to take a short break," she said. "Can I get you anything? Water?" "Water would be fine," Evelyn said. Reyes left. Barlow left. The door closed. Evelyn sat alone in the room and put both her hands flat on the table and looked at them. Her knuckles were white. She hadn't noticed. She breathed slowly and waited for her hands to relax and thought about Travis signing that piece of paper. Thought about what he had been told, what he had been promised, what version of events had been constructed around him to make it feel like his only option. She thought about what Damien had said the night before. "Your brother has never once looked past the next 30 days. $20,000. That's what it had cost. $20,000 and the right story. And Travis had put his signature on a document that could have sent his sister to prison." The door opened and Weller came in, moving fast, already talking. "They're pulling back," he said. "The evidentiary chain has problems they weren't expecting to have to defend on short notice. We'll be out of here within the hour." She looked up at him. "Who called it in? Who gave them the case?" Weller hesitated. We're still determining." "Someone walked a file into this office and sold it as airtight," she said. "Someone with enough credibility that 2 federal agents showed up to Vaughn's estate at 7 in the morning. Who was it?" Weller sat down. He was a careful man. She'd seen that in the 11 minutes she'd known him, the kind who chose his words with professional deliberateness. But something in the way he sat down told her the answer was not going to be a comfortable one. "The initial tip came through a law enforcement contact," he said carefully. "Someone who has a history of providing credible information and used that credibility to push this file up the queue faster than it would normally move. A law enforcement contact." She heard the shape of it. "Someone inside. Someone with access, yes." "Moretti has a contact inside federal law enforcement." Weller said nothing, which was the most lawyerly way of saying yes she had ever encountered. She sat back in the chair. The full architecture of it assembled itself in her mind. Not quickly, not all at once, but piece by piece the way a kitchen came together before service, each element finding its place in the larger structure. The fabricated documents, the forged signatures, the witness statement from Travis, the insider who had pushed the file, the phone call this morning, the timing, All of it arriving at once, coordinated, designed to land before Damien could respond. This had been in preparation for months, not weeks. Months. While she had been cooking breakfast and going to galas and telling herself this was just a job, Vincent Moretti had been building a case against her specifically, a detailed and patient construction designed to do one thing: make Damien Vaughn look like a man who had let his personal life become a liability. Make every other power in the city look at him and see weakness. And Travis had been the final piece, the piece that gave it human texture. Not just fabricated documents, but a real person, blood relation, standing in front of federal agents and saying, "Yes, I saw her there. Yes, I'll sign." "Weller," she said, "yes. When we leave here, when this is done and we walk out, I need you to find out everything you can about Moretti's federal contact. Not for me, for Vaughn. Ms. Hart, my representation of you doesn't extend to—" "I know. I'm asking you as a person, not as my attorney." She looked at him steadily. "Someone put a federal case together using forged documents and a manipulated witness to try to put me in prison for something I didn't do. I'd like that person to be accountable for it." Weller looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his professional expression, a small human crack in the careful surface. "I'll see what I can find," he said. Yeah. They released her at 12:47 in the afternoon. She walked out of the federal building into pale March sunlight with Weller at her side and Damien's second car waiting at the curb, not Damien himself, just the car, and a driver she recognized. And she stood on the steps for a moment and let the cold air move against her face and tried to understand what she was feeling. Not relief. Relief would have required the threat to be over, and the threat was not over. Not anger. Anger was already there, but it had moved somewhere deeper, past the surface level, into the structural, the kind that didn't express itself as heat, but as resolution. What she felt mostly was clarity, the kind of clarity that came from having the last possible illusion removed. She had told herself stories about this situation, that she was adjacent to it, that she was a bystander, that her involvement was practical, and her exposure was managed and the danger was theoretical. Every one of those stories had just been dissolved by a gray room and a forged signature and her brother's handwriting on a document designed to bury her. She was in this. She had been in this since the night Damien came into the kitchen and saw the bruise. Maybe before. Maybe the moment she took the job and cashed the first check, she had been in this, and everything else had just been the distance closing. She got in the car. The driver took her back to the estate without speaking. She sat in the back seat and watched Chicago move past the windows. The winter gray streets, the pedestrians hunched into their coats, the ordinary machinery of a city that didn't know or care about the things happening in its machinery's gears. And she made decisions. Quietly, methodically, the way she decided things in a kitchen when the situation was moving faster than the plan. Damien was in the kitchen when she arrived, not sitting, standing near the window with his phone face down on the counter and his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, which she had never seen before. He looked up when she came through the door, and something in his face shifted. The relief of a man who had spent the last 5 hours not allowing himself to feel relief in advance. "You're okay," he said. "I'm fine." Weller said, "I know what Weller said. I was there." She put her bag down, stood in the middle of the kitchen. "Travis signed a witness statement saying he saw me at a property on the west side that I've never been to. The financial records were fabricated. The signature on the property documents was forged. Someone in federal law enforcement was used to push the file up the queue." She paused. "You knew it was coming." "I knew something was coming, not the specific shape. The specific shape was my brother." Her voice was level. "Did you know he had already given them the statement?" Something crossed Damien's face. "Not until this morning, after you'd already left." "What did you do when you found out?" He was quiet for a moment. "What needed to be done?" "What does that mean?" "It means Travis is no longer able to be used as an instrument against you." He said it without inflection, without drama, the way you reported a logistical resolution. She looked at him. "Is he alive?" The question landed between them, and she watched him process the fact that she had asked it, that she had known him long enough, or understood the world she was in well enough, to ask it directly. "Yes," he said. "He's alive. He's being held somewhere he can't make phone calls until this is over. Held. Safely. Uncomfortably." A pause. He made choices, Evelyn. They have consequences. She pressed her palms flat against the counter and looked at the surface of it. The stainless steel, the honest utilitarian surface she had spent months working on, and breathed. The federal contact, she said. Moretti has someone inside. I know. Weller is trying to identify them. My people already have a name. Something in his voice had changed. She looked up. His jaw was set in the way she had learned over months to recognize as the outermost boundary of his control. It's been confirmed in the last hour. Who is it? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw in his face the calculation. How much to say, in what order, how to frame it. And then she watched him decide against the calculation and just say it. His name is Agent Daniel Marsh. He's been on Moretti's payroll for 3 years. He's also the agent who approved the original staffing clearance for this household 6 months ago. Damien's voice was very quiet. Which means he's the reason you got this job. The kitchen was absolutely silent. She heard what he was saying, heard the full shape of it, the implication that ran underneath the words, like a current under ice, cold and moving, and capable of breaking through. You think I was placed here? She said. I think it's possible. You think Moretti put me here? I think... He stopped, started again. I think Daniel Marsh approved your clearance. I think 6 months later you're the center of a case designed to compromise me. I think those two things might be connected. He looked at her. Or they might not be. I don't know which. She understood then what she was looking at. Not just the accusation, the doubt. The specific doubt of a man who had spent his entire adult life calculating people's angles and had let himself stop calculating with her and was now standing in the rubble of that and trying to determine whether the rubble was an accident or had been engineered. Look at me, she said. He looked at her. I did not know Daniel Marsh. I did not know Vincent Moretti. I answered a job posting from a staffing agency, and I interviewed twice, and I took the position because it paid well and because I needed to get out from under my brother's cycle. Her voice was absolutely steady. I have cooked your meals for 6 months and watched you work and protected this kitchen with more care than I have given anything in my adult life, and every single day I have been exactly who I told you I was. He held her gaze. If you don't believe that, she said, I will walk out of this house right now, and you will never see me again. The silence stretched between them like something physical. She could feel her own pulse in her throat. The kitchen smelled like the stock she'd left on the burner that morning. It had been turned off, probably by someone on staff, and the ghost of rosemary, and something cold coming in from under the back door. I believe you, he said. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. But Moretti is going to use the connection regardless, he said. Whether it was intentional or not, he has the optics. A woman placed by a compromised agent, now living on my property, present at my events. He moved away from the window. He's going to tell every player in this city that you're a plant, that I got sloppy, that I let something get inside my house because I stopped thinking clearly. Because of me, because of how I feel about you. He said it plainly, without softening it, the way he said things that cost him. Which I have not been as careful about concealing as I thought. She stood very still. So what happens now? She said. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd left it and put it back on, and in the gesture she saw the man he was when he was in full operation, contained, deliberate, absolutely certain of the next move even when the move was terrible. Now, he said, I stopped trying to manage this quietly. He looked at her directly, and what she saw in his face was not the controlled fury of the courtyard, or the careful distance of the gala, or the brief unguarded honesty of the back steps. It was something else entirely, something that looked, stripped of all the protective layers, uncomfortably like uncomfortably like fear. Not of Moretti, not of what was coming, of losing her. Now I end this, he said. The next 18 hours moved the way crisis always moved, in short, violent bursts separated by stretches of controlled preparation that felt almost calm until you looked at the hands of the people doing the preparing and saw how tightly they were holding everything. Damien made 7 phone calls in the first hour. She heard none of them directly, but she heard the results. The sounds of the estate changing around her, The shift in personnel, the low, urgent conversations in hallways that stopped when she passed. By 9 that evening, there were 12 men on the property where there had been 4 that morning. Cole had been replaced at the front gate by someone she didn't recognize, someone who moved with the specific economy of a person whose body was a professional instrument. She stayed in the kitchen because the kitchen was the only place she understood completely. And she cooked because cooking was the only thing she could control with any certainty. And she made a beef braise that nobody had asked for because the act of building something slow and patient out of heat and time and attention was the only language she had for the thing sitting in the center of her chest. Marcus came in at 10. "You should sleep," he said. "Probably." She didn't move from the stove. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "He's not going to let anything happen to you." "I know." She stirred the braise. "That's not what I'm worried about." "What are you worried about?" She looked up. "That he's going to do something he can't come back from. That I'm the reason." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Vaughn makes his own decisions." "I know that too." "Then maybe stop carrying weight that isn't yours." He said it without judgment, just plainly, the way he said everything. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to require you to be present." She turned the burner to low and covered the braise and went to bed and lay in the dark of the guest room that had become, in some way she hadn't fully acknowledged, her room, and stared at the ceiling and listened to the estate settle around her and tried to sleep. She didn't sleep. Damien came to find her at 6 the next morning. She was already in the kitchen. He looked like he hadn't slept either, which on him presented as a slight tightening around the eyes and nothing else. His face was composed, his jacket straight, his voice level when he said her name. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her, put both hands flat on the counter between them the way he did when he was about to say something he had decided not to soften. "Last night we identified Moretti's full operational structure in this city. The distribution network, the financial layer, the political contacts." He paused. "And we confirmed that Marsh has been feeding Moretti information on federal investigations for 3 years, including, 6 months ago, approving your clearance with a notation that flagged you as a potential asset." She held his gaze. "A potential asset for who? That's the part that took until this morning to clarify." He looked at her steadily. "Marsh flagged you as a potential asset for Moretti, not as someone Moretti was placing, as someone he was identifying as a future point of leverage, someone close to this household who could be used later if needed." He paused. "The assessment was made after your second interview. You weren't recruited. You were cataloged." The distinction landed and she turned it over carefully. Not placed, not working for them, just noted, filed, kept in a drawer for later use by a man she'd never met, as a tool to reach a man she hadn't yet started working for. "Moretti didn't put me here," she said. "No. He just watched me get here and decided I was useful eventually." "Yes." She nodded slowly. The weight she had been carrying since yesterday shifted slightly. Not gone, but redistributed into something she could manage better now that she understood its actual shape. "What happens today?" she said. Damien was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the particular quality she'd learned to recognize as his version of absolute honesty, stripped of strategy, stripped of management, just the thing itself. "I'm going to meet with Moretti tonight," he said. She stared at him. "You're going to—" "A negotiation. His people reached out this morning. He wants to discuss terms." "He wants to discuss terms after he just tried to put me in federal prison." "Yes." "And you're going to go?" "Yes." "Why?" Her voice had an edge in it now. "Why would you walk into a room with a man who just demonstrated exactly how far he's willing to go?" "Because if I don't go," Damien said, "he moves to the next option, which is not another federal case, which is something louder and less precise." He held her gaze. "I go. I hear what he's offering, and I use the meeting to put in front of him something that ends this without a war that takes out half the city in the process." "What are you putting in front of him?" He reached into his jacket and slid a folded document across the counter. She opened it. It took her 30 seconds to understand what she was reading. 3 pages of financial records, shell company structures, property transactions, a clear and detailed map of money, moving from Moretti's operations through 4 layers of legitimate business and into accounts registered under names she didn't recognize. This is his entire financial architecture, she said. Yes. Where did you get this? People who were unhappy with Moretti's current direction and happy to demonstrate it. She looked up. You're going to threaten him with this. I'm going to show him what I have and tell him that if he walks away tonight, it stays buried. He took the document back. Mutually assured destruction. It's not elegant, but it's clean. And if he doesn't walk away, then it goes to people who will make excellent use of it. She looked at him across the counter and felt the full weight of what was happening. Not just tonight, not just Moretti, but the larger thing, the thing she had been watching move toward this point for months without fully naming. You're dismantling it, she said. Not just Moretti, all of it. He didn't deny it. You've been moving money, restructuring operations. She thought about the conversation she'd half heard, the meetings, the documents she'd glimpsed. How long have you been planning this? Longer than I've known you, he said, but knowing you changed the timeline. She sat with that. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to hear it as information, not as, I need you to hear it clearly. Say it. When this is done, if it works, if we get through tonight, this empire is gone. The business, the network, the operations, all of it. I'm walking away from everything my family built. He looked at her directly. Which means I'm walking away from the protection it provides. For a period of time, I will be more vulnerable than I have been since I was 19 years old. I understand that. I'm not asking you to be there for that part. His voice was careful in a way that cost him something. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the full shape of what I'm doing and what comes after. She looked at him for a long moment. You're in love with me, she said. The words landed, and he didn't flinch, and he didn't look away, and he didn't reach for the careful distance he usually kept like a tool in his hand. Yes, he said, and you're telling me now before tonight because you don't know what tonight looks like on the other side. Yes, she breathed in slowly. That's an enormous amount of information to put in front of someone before 7 in the morning. Something moved in his face, almost the smile again. I know. I haven't said anything back. I know that too. She stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the bare courtyard, the dead rose bushes, the gray Chicago morning sitting on everything like a judgment. She stood there for a long moment with her back to him, and her hands in her coat pockets, and felt the full complicated weight of everything she had spent the last months carefully not allowing herself to feel completely. Then she turned around. Come back tonight, she said. Then we'll talk. He looked at her. Don't make me say it twice, she said. Just come back. He stood up, picked up the document, held her gaze for one moment that had everything in it and nothing that needed to be spoken. Then he left. The warehouse sat on the south bank of the Chicago River, half a mile from a stretch of reclaimed waterfront that developers had been fighting over for a decade. It had been empty for 6 years, owned by a holding company that was owned by another holding company that eventually, if you followed the chain far enough, connected back to Moretti's organization. Damien had known about it for 3 years. The fact that Moretti had chosen it for tonight told him something about how Moretti was feeling, proprietary, confident, in control of the geography. That was fine. Damien had been in worse rooms. He came with Marcus and 2 others. Moretti's man at the door counted them and made a phone call and then stepped aside. The warehouse interior was exactly what abandoned Chicago industrial space always was. Concrete floors, iron columns, the smell of river damp and old metal, and decades of use that hadn't fully left despite years of emptiness. Someone had set up lights, industrial work lights on stands, positioned to illuminate a central area where 2 folding tables had been pushed together and 6 chairs arranged around them. The kind of neutral ground theater that men in Moretti's position liked to perform. Vincent Moretti was already seated. Damien had seen photographs. Moretti in person was smaller than the photographs suggested, compact, mid-50s, gray-haired, and well-dressed with the particular careful grooming of a man who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He had 3 men with him. He watched Damien cross the warehouse floor without standing, which was a statement, and Damien sat down across from him without acknowledging the statement, which was a counterstatement, and the negotiation began before either of them said a word. Damien. Moretti's voice was measured, Midwestern flat, like his accent had been professionally sanded down. Vincent, I appreciate you coming. I almost didn't. Moretti almost smiled. The federal situation this morning, I want you to know that was further than I intended to take it. Further, Damien looked at him steadily. You put a woman's name on fabricated narcotics documents and walked them into a federal office through a dirty agent, and you want me to understand it was further than you intended. The intention was pressure, not prosecution. Pressure. The word came out flat and cold. You used her brother to sign a false witness statement and called it pressure. Her brother came to us voluntarily. Her brother is $20,000 stupid, and you knew that before you made the offer. Damien put both hands on the table. Don't dress it up, Vincent. Tell me what you want. Moretti leaned back in his chair. The work light above them threw hard shadows across his face. What I want is what I've wanted for 8 months. The Harrison Street corridor. Full operational access, no interference, no tax to your organization. Harrison Street is my territory. Harrison Street is inefficiently managed territory that generates a fraction of what it should. Moretti's voice stayed pleasant. You've been distracted. Everyone sees it. Your distribution managers are nervous. Your political contacts are wondering who's actually making decisions. He tilted his head slightly. And now you have a personal attachment to someone connected to a federal case. That kind of thing makes people uncertain. My people aren't uncertain. Some of them are. Moretti let that sit for a moment. I'm not here to fight you, Damien. I'm here to offer you a rational exit from an overextended position. Give me Harrison Street. I'll pull back the federal angle entirely. Marsh buries it. The case disappears. Your chef goes back to her kitchen with a clean record. And we go back to the arrangement we had 2 years ago. Damien looked at him. The warehouse was quiet, except for the sound of river water moving against the pilings outside and the distant machinery of the city going about its business. That's your offer, Damien said. It's a fair offer. It's a fair offer if I believe you'll honor it, which requires me to believe that the man who fabricated federal evidence and used a woman's brother as a pawn is going to respect a verbal agreement made in an empty warehouse. He paused. So no. Moretti's pleasantness didn't change, which was its own kind of signal. Then we have a problem. We have a different solution. Damien reached into his jacket. One of Moretti's men moved immediately, hand going toward a jacket, body shifting forward. Damien kept his own hands visible and slow and placed the folded document on the table and slid it across. Read it, he said. Moretti looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up the document and unfolded it and read it. And Damien watched his face while he read and watched the pleasantness slowly rearrange itself into something that had more effort in it. Moretti read all 3 pages. He looked up. Where did you get this? He said. From people who've been watching your architecture for longer than you've been aware of being watched. Damien kept his voice even. The full documentation, all of it, shell companies, account numbers, transaction histories, names, is in the hands of 3 separate people right now. If I don't make contact with all 3 of them by midnight, it goes to federal investigators who are not Daniel Marsh and who will not be manageable. The warehouse was very quiet. You're threatening me, Moretti said. I'm offering you the same thing you offered me, a rational exit. If I walk away tonight, the documentation stays buried. You keep your South Side operation. We maintain separate territories. No Harrison Street, no federal angle, no more moves against people in my household. Damien looked at him directly. And we both walk away from this room and never have this conversation again. Moretti set the document down on the table. His hands were very still. Behind him, his 3 men had the particular tension of people waiting for a signal that hadn't come yet. You'd trust me to honor that, Moretti said. No. But you'd honor it because the alternative is everything you've built for 15 years going up in a federal investigation that reaches your political contacts and your banking relationships, and the 3 city councilmen whose names are in that document. Damien paused. You're not afraid of me, Vincent. You've never been afraid of me. But you should be afraid of that. Moretti looked at the document, looked at Damien. The work light buzzed slightly above them. I need 24 hours, Moretti said. You have until midnight. Damien. Midnight. He stood up. 1 phone call, yes or no, that's all. He turned and walked back across the warehouse floor toward the door, Marcus at his left, the other 2 behind, And he did not look back, because looking back in a room like this was the kind of thing that invited a bullet between the shoulder blades, and he had survived this long partly by knowing exactly when not to look back. He was 20 feet from the door when Moretti's voice came across the concrete. "You're dismantling it, aren't you?" Not a question, almost curious. "The whole operation, that's what this is really about." Damien stopped. "The documentation, the clean exit, the woman." Moretti's voice was thoughtful. "You're not trying to win, you're trying to get out." Damien didn't turn around. "Midnight, Vincent." He pushed through the warehouse door into the cold river air and walked to the car and got in and sat in the back seat while Marcus drove away from the riverbank and said nothing for a long time. His phone buzzed at 11:43 p.m. A number he didn't recognize. One word. Agreed. He looked at the word for a moment, felt the particular quality of a held breath finally releasing. Not relief exactly, not yet, because relief required the thing to be fully over, and it wasn't fully over. There were threads to pull, marsh to neutralize, the documentation to use as insurance, the operational dismantling that would take months and would make him vulnerable in ways he hadn't been vulnerable in 20 years, but the word was there on the screen. Agreed. He told the driver to take him back to the estate. The kitchen light was on. He saw it from the car as they came through the gate. The warm rectangle of the kitchen window against the dark of the estate, the only light burning at this hour. He knew what it meant. She was waiting. He came through the side door and she was at the stove with a pot of something that smelled like the braise from the night before, reheated, and she turned when she heard him and looked at him the way she always looked at him, taking inventory, reading the room, assessing with the particular precision of someone who had learned very early that the gap between what people said and what was actually true was where all the danger lived. "Done?" she asked. "For now." He took off his jacket. He agreed. She nodded, turned back to the stove, stirred the braise once, slowly. "Travis," she said, "he'll be released tomorrow morning. He'll have enough to relocate if he chooses to." He paused. "The choice is his." She was quiet for a moment. "And Marsh?" "Being handled through channels that don't require my direct involvement." He moved to the counter. "The case against you will be formally dropped. Weller will have the paperwork by morning." She set the spoon down on the rest beside the stove, stood there with her back to him for a moment, her shoulders rising and falling with one slow breath. Then she turned around. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and she put her hands on either side of his face and she kissed him. And it was not the careful tentative thing that first kisses were supposed to be. It was the kiss of 2 people who had been standing at the edge of something for months and had finally run out of reasons not to step off. He kissed her back with both hands in her hair and the braise steaming gently behind her, and the kitchen warm and the estate quiet and the city outside doing what cities did, indifferent and constant and alive. When she pulled back, she kept her hands on his face. "I'm not saying it yet," she said. Her voice was rough in a way he hadn't heard before. "I know, but I'm not saying it." He looked at her. The particular restraint in his face was not operational right now. She could see all of it, the whole unguarded thing, the man underneath the architecture of control and reputation, and 38 years of a particular kind of survival. "I know that too," he said quietly. She dropped her hands, turned back to the stove, picked up the spoon. "Sit down," she said. "I'll feed you." He sat down at the counter, and for a few minutes in the quiet kitchen, with the braise and the warm light and the long specific exhale of a crisis that had not yet fully passed but had turned a corner, it couldn't turn back from. They were just 2 people in a room, and it was enough. And it was more than either of them had believed they were going to get tonight. The agreed word on the screen lasted exactly 9 days. Damien knew it before the call came. He knew it the way you knew weather in a city that had taught you to read the sky. Not from one sign, but from the accumulation of small signals that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. 2 of Moretti's mid-level people had gone quiet in ways that weren't retirement quiet. A contact in the south side had passed word that vehicles were moving in patterns that didn't match normal operations. And Daniel Marsh, who was supposed to be neutralized through channels, had not shown up to a scheduled meeting with the federal internal affairs investigator who had been quietly building a case against him for 72 hours. Marsh had run, which meant Moretti knew the case against him was moving faster than anticipated, which meant the agreed was no longer operative, which meant the 9 days of careful, almost ordinary life inside the estate, Evelyn cooking, Damien dismantling, both of them moving around each other in the kitchen with a new kind of proximity that hadn't been named yet, but was present in every glance and every brushed hand and every evening at the counter, eating food she made while the city outside did its indifferent city things. Those 9 days were ending. Marcus told him at 4 a.m. Damien was already awake. "How many?" he said. "We think 6 teams. Coordinated." The warehouse meet was a delay tactic. He used the 9 days to put pieces in position. Marcus's voice carried the controlled urgency of a man who had managed crises long enough to know that panic was a luxury that cost more than it was worth. He's targeting the documentation holders first. 2 of the 3 have already been moved to secondary locations. The 3rd isn't answering. "Who's the 3rd? Marcus said a name. Damien was already putting his jacket on. "Get Evelyn to the North Burling property. Now. Full security detail, not 2 men. The full rotation." "She's going to push back. Tell her it's not a discussion. And if she makes it one anyway." Damien stopped at the door. "Then you tell her I said that the next few hours are the part I can't manage if I'm also managing her safety. She'll understand that." He was right. She understood it. She pushed back anyway. He heard it through the wall while he was on the phone. Her voice clear and controlled, saying, "I am not going to sit in a house while..." And then Marcus saying something low, and then silence. And then the sound of her moving, which was the sound of a person choosing to trust something that cost them. He caught her in the hallway before she left. She had her coat and her bag and her jaw set in the way he'd learned meant she was holding something down by force of will. "Don't do something I can't undo," she said. "Define undo." "You know what I mean." He looked at her. In the hallway light at 4 a.m, she looked like herself entirely. No performance, no management, just Evelyn Hart with her dark eyes and her careful posture and the specific quality of her attention that had been the first thing he'd noticed about her and had not stopped noticing since. "I'll be careful," he said. "That's not what I asked." He reached out and touched her face, just the back of 2 fingers against her cheek, where the bruise had been 9 months ago, now healed to nothing. She went very still. "Go," he said quietly. "I'll come when it's done." She held his gaze for 1 more second. Then she turned and walked out with Marcus, and he stood in the empty hallway and listened to the car leave and turned back to the work. The next 6 hours were the most dangerous of his life, and he had lived a life with significant competition for that title. Moretti had been thorough. The 6 teams were not amateurs. They were professionals working from a detailed operational picture of Damien's network, which meant the intelligence he'd fed Marsh over 3 years had been more comprehensive than even Damien had realized. Properties he thought were unknown were known. Routes he considered private were mapped. 2 of his most trusted operational managers received approaches within the first hour. Not attacks, offers, the same pitch that had been made to the distribution managers weeks ago, now delivered with the implicit message that the offering window was closing fast. Both managers called Damien directly. Both of them were pulled back to the estate. By 6 a.m, the shape of the night had clarified into something he could work with. Moretti wasn't trying to destroy the operation. He was trying to acquire it, piece by piece, pressure point by pressure point, offering money and safety to anyone willing to step away from Damien's side and toward his. It was methodical. It was patient. It was the strategy of a man who had decided that the documentation leverage meant a direct war was too costly and that acquisition was cleaner. What Moretti had not accounted for, what he could not have accounted for because it was not visible from the outside, was that Damien had already begun dismantling. The pieces Moretti was trying to acquire were pieces Damien had already decided to give up. The territory, the network, the operational structure that had taken his family 2 generations to build, he had spent the last 4 months quietly, deliberately reducing it to a fraction of its former weight, not abandoning it chaotically, winding it down, paying out obligations, moving people toward legitimate positions where they could land without destruction. So when Moretti's teams moved on the Harrison Street distribution points, they found skeleton operations. When they approached the financial management layer, they found accounts that had been restructured and in several cases closed. When they moved on the political contacts, they found men who had already been quietly released from their arrangements and were therefore not Damien's men to lose. What they found, in other words, was a building that was already being vacated. Damien sat in the estate's operations room at 7:30 in the morning with Cole and two others and a map of the city on the table and watched Moretti's teams land on positions that were lighter than expected, and understood that the moment Moretti realized what he was looking at, not a weakened empire but a deliberately thinned one, the calculation would change again. It changed at 8:47. The call came to his direct line, which meant Moretti had it, which meant Marsh had given it to him, which meant the 9 days had been used for very thorough homework. "You sold me an empty building," Moretti said. "I offered you a clean exit. You chose a different option. The documentation is still in place, still moving toward people who are not manageable." Damien kept his voice even. "Your teams have spent the last 4 hours acquiring the shell of an operation I was already walking away from. You've paid a significant amount of money for leverage that doesn't exist." Silence on the line. "The South Side operation is yours," Damien said. "It was always going to be yours because I was always going to leave it. The only question was whether you took it clean or took it bloody." He paused. "You chose bloody, so now you have it, and you have a federal documentation package pointed at your financial architecture, and you have Daniel Marsh in the wind, which means you have a liability you can't locate." He let that sit for a moment. "Walk away, Vincent. Take what you've already taken. It's enough." Another silence, longer this time. "You're really out," Moretti said, not hostile, almost surprised. The particular surprise of a man in a predatory industry encountering someone who had genuinely decided to stop being prey or predator. "I'm really out." "The woman." "Yes," Damien said, "among other reasons." Moretti was quiet for a moment. "The documentation goes into a box, stays there as long as we stay out of each other's way." He paused. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the math. The thing you wanted is gone. The thing that threatens you is still active. The rational move is the same one it's always been." He heard Moretti breathing on the line, heard the sound of a man who had spent 15 years building something and was now calculating whether the thing in front of him was an opportunity or a trap, and finding that the calculation kept coming out the same way regardless of how he ran it. "If you come back," Moretti started, "I'm not coming back. If the documentation surfaces, it won't, unless you make it necessary." One more silence. The city outside the estate's windows was fully awake now, going about its morning, utterly indifferent to the conversation happening inside. "Done," Moretti said, and the line went dead. Damien set the phone on the table, looked at the map, looked at the positions where Moretti's teams had moved and were now, presumably, standing in the middle of operations that were lighter than expected and would shortly receive the instruction to stand down. Cole looked at him. "Is it over?" "The worst of it." He stood up. "Get someone on Marsh. I want to know where he lands." "And if he lands somewhere problematic?" "Then we deal with it. But carefully. No more blood if there's another way." Cole nodded, which was the closest he ever came to expressing an opinion. Damien picked up his jacket and walked out of the operations room and through the estate and out the side door into the March morning. Cold still, but the specific cold of a season preparing to give way, the kind of cold that had lost some of its conviction. And he stood in the dead garden for a moment and breathed. The air tasted like river and exhaust, and the faint mineral promise of spring ground not yet soft enough to smell like itself. He called Marcus. "Bring her home," he said. "But he—" She came back at noon. She walked through the kitchen door and set her bag down and looked at him across the counter and said nothing for a moment, reading his face the way she always read his face, methodically, thoroughly, without asking permission. "It's done," he said. "Everyone's alive. Everyone who matters to me is alive." He paused. "Marsh is still in the wind. We'll find him. He's not a threat on his own. Without Moretti's operation behind him, he's just a man with information and nowhere safe to use it." She nodded slowly, moved to the stove, put the kettle on, which was what she did when she needed something to do with her hands while she processed things. "Travis," she said, "released this morning, I had some money sent to an address he gave, enough for 6 months somewhere that isn't Chicago." He watched her face. The rest is his choice. She stood with her back to him while the kettle heated. He could see her shoulders, the particular set of them, the way they carried things, and also, slowly, let things down. I haven't talked to him, she said. I don't know if I will. That's yours to decide. I know. She was quiet for a moment. He signed that paper, Damien. He sat across from a federal agent and he signed his name to something that could have sent me to prison. Her voice was not angry. It was something sadder and more final than anger. I know why he did it. I've known why Travis does everything for 30 years. It doesn't change what the thing is. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The kettle began to sound. She took it off the burner and poured and stood at the counter with both hands around the mug and stared at the steam. My mother used to say he'd figure it out eventually, she said, that he just needed enough time and enough consequences. She paused. She died waiting. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would improve on the simple weight of that, and he had learned slowly that Evelyn didn't need improvement on her truths. She needed them witnessed. I'm not going to keep waiting, she said. If he comes back with something real, a real change, not a story about a change, I'll be here. But I'm not going to keep filling holes. She picked up the mug. That's done. He nodded. She turned to look at him. Her face in the noon light was open in a way it rarely was. Not the professional composure, not the careful management, just the actual face, with the tiredness in it and the something else that had been building in it for months and was now close enough to the surface that she wasn't bothering to push it back down. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. When you started bringing me to those events. When you put your name around me in front of all those people. She held his gaze. Was it only protection? Was that the true reason? He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the answer he could give, the careful one, the one that maintained the plausible frame of practicality and strategy and rational calculation. He'd been giving that answer to himself for months, and it had never fully fit, and he had kept trying to make it fit because the alternative was acknowledging something that a man in his position could not easily afford. No, he said. It wasn't only protection. What was the other part? I wanted people to see you next to me. He said it plainly, without the cushion of explanation. Not as a statement of ownership, not as strategy. I wanted... He stopped, tried again. I had been in rooms full of powerful people for 20 years, and none of them made me want to be better than what I was. And then you came into my kitchen and cooked my food and talked back to me and refused to be afraid of me, and I started wanting things I hadn't wanted since before I understood what the wanting cost. He paused. The events were protection, and they were also me being selfish in the only way I knew how to be at the time. She looked at him for a long time. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, she said. I've been working up to it. Something moved in her face, not quite the almost smile, something fuller than that, something that reached her eyes and stayed there. I'm going to need you to be that honest consistently, she said. Not occasionally, not when the situation forces it. Consistently. I know, and I need to know. When you walk away from all of this, when the operation is gone and the structure is gone, and the name doesn't mean what it used to mean, I need to know who you are without it, because I don't know that person yet. Neither do I, he said. Not completely. That's an honest answer. It's the only kind I have left. She set her mug down on the counter, crossed the kitchen, stood in front of him and looked at his face with the same thorough attention she gave everything. The same methodical care she brought to a dish that required time and precision and patience and the willingness to stay with it through the difficult middle part. Then we figure it out, she said. Together, slowly, without anyone shooting at us if possible. I can't promise the last part indefinitely. I know, but try. She put her hand in his, not dramatically, just placed it there, palm against palm, fingers finding the spaces between his fingers. And he closed his hand around hers, and they stood in the kitchen in the noon light and didn't say anything else for a while, because there was nothing else that needed saying right at that moment. What? The months that followed were the strangest of Damien Vaughn's life, and he had lived through months that had contained violence and loss, and the kinds of decisions that marked the inside of a person permanently. But strange was the right word for this particular period. Strange because it was quiet, and quiet was a texture he had no vocabulary for, no instinct trained to navigate, The operational dismantling took 4 months in total. It was not clean. Clean was never actually available. What was available was careful, and careful was what he was. Obligations were honored. People were moved toward positions that could hold their weight. The financial architecture was restructured, legitimized, and submitted to the kind of scrutiny that was either brave or reckless depending on your perspective. And he had enough lawyers to make it land on the side of brave. Moretti kept his word. The South Side absorbed the former Harrison Street operations, and Damien monitored it from a distance and noted the absence of his name in spaces where his name had previously been necessary, and found the absence, after the first disorienting months, something close to relief. Daniel Marsh surfaced in Detroit in May. He was arrested by federal agents who were not manageable and charged with a list of violations that would occupy a courtroom for the better part of a year. His testimony about Moretti was part of a separate proceeding that Damien's attorneys monitored carefully from the appropriate distance. The documentation package, sealed and held by 3 parties who had agreed to hold it indefinitely, remained in its box. The federal case against Evelyn Hart was formally dismissed on a Thursday in April. Weller called her with the news, and she was in the middle of reducing a sauce and said thank you and hung up and finished the sauce, and only then stood at the stove for a moment with her eyes closed and her hands on the counter and breathed. Damien saw it from the doorway. He didn't say anything. He went and stood beside her, and that was enough. Travis called her once, from a number she didn't recognize, 3 months after the night everything ended. She picked up because she didn't know who it was. Evie. His voice was quieter than she was used to, the particular register of a man who had been in a small room with himself for long enough to hear some things he'd been avoiding. She sat down at the kitchen table. "Where are you?" "Somewhere that isn't Chicago." A pause. "I'm working. Actual work. A kitchen supply warehouse. It's not. It's fine. It's okay." "Okay," she said. "I know what I did." He said it without preamble, without the framing and the context and the explanation that would have been his younger self's approach. Just the thing, set down plainly. "I know what I signed. I know what it could have done." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I just needed you to know I know." She looked at the kitchen window, the spring light coming through it, yellow and thin and honest. "I know you know," she said. "That's not the hard part." "What's the hard part?" "The hard part is that knowing doesn't undo it, and it doesn't mean you won't do the next version of it when the next pressure comes." She paused. "I'm not saying you will. I'm saying I don't know yet. And until I know, I need distance." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's fair?" "Yeah." She pressed her thumb against the edge of the table. "It is. Are you okay?" he asked. Actually, are you okay?" She thought about the question, really thought about it, the way it deserved to be thought about, without the reflexive fine that had been her answer to that question her entire adult life. "Yes," she said. "I think I am, actually." She heard him exhale on the other end. "Good." Another pause. "Okay, I'll leave you alone." "Travis?" "Yeah, get to a year. Of the work, of staying clean of the debt, of being someone who doesn't need someone else to fill the holes. Get to a year and then call me again." A long silence. "Okay," he said. She ended the call and sat at the table for a moment and felt the particular complicated weight of a relationship that was not over, but was being set down, carefully, in a place where it could either become something different or stay where it was, and the choice belonged to someone else, for once. She picked up her coffee and went back to the stove. The restaurant was Evelyn's idea. Not the way it eventually became. Not with the silver lettering and the reservation list and the wine program she spent 3 months building with a sommelier she'd found through a culinary contact in New York. The original idea was smaller. A place. A kitchen that was hers. A room where the thing she was best at could exist on its own terms, with her name on it, without being anyone's private service or anyone's domestic management. She brought it to Damien on a Tuesday evening with a folded piece of paper that had 4 lines of handwriting on it. A space she'd identified in Lincoln Park, a number, a concept, and a question mark at the end. He looked at the paper. looked at her. "You'd need a partner," he said, "for the business side." "I know. Someone with capital and operational experience who can manage the non-kitchen parts without getting in the way of the kitchen parts." "I had someone in mind." "Evelyn, don't make it a big thing. Either you want to do it or you don't." He looked at the paper again. 4 lines. A space in Lincoln Park. A concept that was, he understood reading between the lines, exactly what she was. Direct, precise, unglamorous in the best sense, committed to the thing itself rather than the performance of the thing. "I want to do it," he said. "Then we do it." They did it. The work of building a restaurant from a space in Lincoln Park into something real took 11 months and was, in its own way, as grueling as anything that had preceded it. The permits and the contractors and the equipment sourcing and the staff hiring and the soft openings and the adjustments, and the night the walk-in failed 3 hours before service, and Evelyn stood in the kitchen directing her team around the crisis with the specific calm authority of someone who had navigated worse, which she had, and the whole thing moved and shifted and slowly, through the particular alchemy of sustained effort and genuine care, became itself. Hart & Vaughan opened on a Thursday in March, 14 months after a night in an empty warehouse, and a word on a phone screen, and a woman who told a man to come back before she'd say the rest of it. She put both their names on it. He had suggested only hers. She had said no without explanation, which he had understood. The first review came 3 weeks after opening. A food critic from a publication he'd never read described the restaurant as a place that cooks like it has something to prove and proves it quietly, in the best possible way. Evelyn read it at the kitchen pass with her chef's coat on and her hair back and the dinner service about to start, and she handed the review to her sous chef and said nothing and turned back to her station. But he saw, from the pass-through where he was standing with his sleeves rolled up and a clipboard and the slightly overwhelmed expression of a man learning, at 41, how to run something that had no violence in it, he saw the smallest thing move across her face that he had come to understand was her version of pride. He didn't say anything. He went back to his clipboard. The Michelin stars came in the second year. 2 of them, announced on a morning in November when Evelyn was standing in the walk-in doing inventory, and her phone buzzed and she read the notification and stood among the cold shelves and the hanging produce and the organized precision of her own domain for a long moment before she came out. She found Damien at the bar, going over supplier contracts. She handed him her phone. He read it, set the phone down on the bar, looked at her. She looked back at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that was not quite tears, but was the territory immediately adjacent to them. The territory of a person who has wanted something for a very long time and has never been entirely certain they would get it, and has now gotten it and is standing in the small, stunned aftermath of that. 2, he said. 2, she confirmed. He reached across the bar and took her hand. She let him, which she always did now, not with the careful deliberateness of someone making a decision, but with the ease of something that had become natural through repetition and trust and time. "We should call someone," he said. "In a minute." She didn't move. She stood with his hand around hers and looked at the restaurant in its morning state, the empty tables, the light coming in through the front windows, the particular stillness of a room that would fill in a few hours with noise and warmth, and the ordinary, extraordinary fact of people choosing to be somewhere together. Give me a minute." He gave her a minute. She stood in the restaurant with the November light on everything and felt the specific quality of this particular moment. Not happiness exactly, though happiness was in it, but something more substantial than happiness. Something that had been built rather than arrived at. Something that had her name on it, and his, and the memory of everything it had cost, and the understanding, finally settled and no longer theoretical, that the cost had been worth it. Some things you couldn't know until you were standing in them. This was one of those things. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. 5 years after a Tuesday night in February, when a man walked into his kitchen and saw a bruise on a woman's face, they sat at the corner table. It was a Tuesday again. The restaurant was full. It was always full now, the reservation list running months out, the dining room carrying the specific warmth of a room that had found its identity and settled into it. The kitchen was in the hands of her sous chef tonight, a young woman from Pilsen named Rosa, who had been with them since the second month, and who cooked with the particular focused hunger of someone who understood that this was not just a job, but an education in how to do the thing completely. Evelyn trusted Rosa with the kitchen. This had taken time. Letting go of control over the thing you'd built was its own kind of courage, smaller than the others, but real. They ate slowly. He had ordered for both of them, which he was now allowed to do on certain evenings, and she had accepted without argument, which was a form of intimacy she had arrived at through a long route and valued accordingly. The food was from her menu, but she experienced it differently tonight. Not as a cook reading her own work, but as a person eating at the table she'd built in the life she'd built, and tasting all of it with full attention. The city was visible through the front windows. Chicago in early spring, the light lasting longer now, the streets carrying the particular energy of a city remembering what warmth was. Damien reached across the table and took her hand. She looked at his hand around hers. At the scar along his knuckle she'd touched once without asking, and he'd let her, which was the first time he'd let her touch something without a reason. "You're doing the thing where you're quiet and thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking. You're doing the specific kind." She looked up at him. He looked back. No performance, no management, just the face of a man who had been in the process of becoming a different person for 5 years and was not finished, but was further along than he'd expected to be, further along than he'd believed was available to him. The lines around his eyes were deeper than when she'd met him. His hair had more gray in it. He looked overall like a person who had lived in his own life rather than around it. "I'm thinking about the kitchen on that first night," she said, "when you came in and I was standing at the counter. I remember. I was trying to hold myself together. I thought I was doing it well." "You were doing it terribly," he said. "I could see it from across the room." She almost smiled. "I know. You were better at reading me than anyone had ever been, and you'd only known me for 6 months. She paused. "It scared me. I know that too. It still scares me sometimes." She turned his hand over in hers, looked at the palm. "Being this visible to someone. Having someone who sees all of it." She looked up. "I spent so long being invisible that being seen feels like it still requires some getting used to." "Does it feel bad?" he asked. Not anxiously, just genuinely. She thought about the question, really thought about it. "No," she said. "It feels like the truth, and the truth isn't comfortable, but it's better than the alternative." He nodded slowly. The restaurant moved around them, glasses clinking, conversations running together into the warm ambient music of a room full of people who had chosen to be somewhere specific tonight. Rosa came out of the kitchen briefly, caught Evelyn's eye across the room, gave the small nod that meant everything was running, then went back through the pass. Damien watched her watch the restaurant. "You built something," he said. "We built something. You built the part that matters. I managed the permits." She looked at him sideways. "You managed significantly more than the permits. The permits and the contractor disputes, and the walk-in refrigeration crisis, and the supplier negotiations, and the HR infrastructure, and the incident with the health inspector in month 4 that I still don't know the full story of. And you never will." He almost smiled. "The real one. The one that reached his eyes and made him look his actual age and younger at the same time." She looked at him for a moment. At the whole of him. The person he was in this room, in this life. With the empire gone and the name quieted to a ghost story that old people told in bars and young people didn't fully believe, and the person who remained after all of that was stripped away was a man sitting across from her at a corner table in a restaurant they'd built together, holding her hand, with good food in front of them, and the city outside, and the specific, ordinary, extraordinary fact of a Tuesday evening with nothing threatening it. Some scars didn't disappear. She knew that. The ones Travis had left, not on her cheek but further in the complicated layered place where family lived and failed and lived again, those were still there, though quieter now. Travis had called it 11 months, as she'd asked, and the conversation had been short and careful, and neither of them had pushed past what it could hold, which was its own kind of progress. The distance was still real. It might always be somewhat real. She had made a kind of peace with that. Not a happy peace, but a true one. Damien carried his own scar tissue. She knew the shapes of it now. The nights that came occasionally when the quiet of their life felt unfamiliar, in ways that unsettled him, when the absence of threat read as wrongness because his nervous system had spent decades calibrating to danger as the baseline. She had learned not to fix those nights, just to be present in them, to stay in the room, to let him find his own way back. He always found his way back. That was the thing she had learned, slowly and through means she couldn't have anticipated, about people who had survived difficult versions of their own lives. They found their way back if you gave them the space to do it and the reason to want to. She tightened her hand around his. He looked at her. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She picked up her glass. "I'm just glad you came into the kitchen that night." He was quiet for a moment. "You were holding yourself together terribly." "I know. I almost didn't say anything." "I know that too." "I'm glad I did," he said. She took a sip of wine, set the glass down, looked at the restaurant. Her restaurant, their restaurant, the room she'd built with her name on the door and her food on every table and her standards running through every part of it, and felt the particular fullness of a life that had arrived at something real through a route that had been nothing like what she would have planned. The plans you made were never the life you got. She'd known that since she was young. What she hadn't known, what she was still learning every day, in this room and in the kitchen and at this table and in the ordinary, difficult, ongoing work of a life shared with another person, was that the life you got could be better than the plan. Not easier, not without cost, but truer and deeper and more entirely yours. Chicago glittered through the front windows. The restaurant hummed. The food was good. The hand in hers was warm. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.